We were talking about stories and strange stories, and that you've experienced some type of synchronicities in your life. What were those about?
Yeah, so you'd asked me about alien experiences or ghosts or things like that or
Yeah.
supernatural. And so I can't claim to have any of like those kinds of traditional experiences, but I do believe in a spiritual reality. I do believe in some kind of afterlife or next life. I have very nebulous spiritual beliefs. I was raised a Christian, became a born again Christian early in life, drifted away from that in a very stereotypical sense in my 20s.
Hmm.
And now I'm at a place where I don't really know what I believe. And I still have, I would describe it, a significant crisis of faith in the meaning of life and the justification for the sufferings we go through. But all of that having been said,
Hmm.
foundationally, I do believe in God, a spiritual realm.
Hmm.
And so I have seen in my life at times, and I think other people can identify with this, what Jung called synchronicities. And these are times when coincidences happen to you, seeming coincidences that are meaningful or that could be read as meaningful if you would accept them as such. And so I have a couple of instances. I guess I'll tell you this one story because to me it seems so coincidental as to be unlikely. So when I was in my 20s, the guy that I was dating, that I'd been dating for 4 years, was almost like a fiance to me. We weren't engaged, but almost
Hmm.
like a fiance. He got cancer, lung cancer, by the way, from smoking. So you'll put your tobacco down.
Mm.
But he got cancer and he died. And in your 20s, it's traumatic at any age, but in your 20s, you're not really expecting to deal with
Sure.
that, right? It was very hard. And it was hard to watch him go through that process. I was his primary caregiver. And
Wow.
it's terrible when
Yeah.
someone gets a terminal illness and they
Yeah.
deteriorate and they die. And so I came out of that. I had gone into that situation more or less an agnostic at that point anyway, and I came out of it pretty much with a similar view, except I was really struggling at that point, yearning for some kind of indication that God existed because I just couldn't handle, like many people, couldn't
Yeah.
handle the idea that death was just it and that everything we're doing here is utter pointlessness and nothing continues on, right?
Yeah.
And so yet though, because I was not a Christian and I didn't trust any kind of organized faith or religion, I felt like there was no one that I could turn to. And so this might seem kind of strange to people, but I started reading about near-death experiences because that was the only thing that I could handle reading about. I didn't want to read the Bible or, the Quran or whatever. Like I just wanted to read stories about people who say there's an afterlife,
Right.
basically, right?
Yeah.
I was clinically brain dead. I got outside my body. I saw the light, these kinds of things,
Yeah.
right? And so I started reading these, not like obsessively or anything, but here and there. And I was going through this crisis of faith and this struggle. And I remember that I got to a point where I prayed this prayer to God. And it seems like such a weird prayer to pray, but I'll explain it in a moment. I said, God, I need an indication that you are real, that there is some kind of afterlife, that there's a purpose to all this. I need a sign. And this is the sign that I chose. And it sounds so random, but I'll explain it in a minute. I said, I need you to send someone into my life who is a recognized expert in near-death experiences. That was what I asked for. And the reason I asked for it was not because I wanted to talk to someone about near-death experiences. I'd read about them, but because that was at that point, that was the only connection that I felt like I could safely have to the spiritual, because I didn't want to go to church. I didn't want to get an organized religion. This was like the only thing I had at that moment, right? That I was sort of clinging on to. And so that was the thing I chose. Kind of strangely, I said, this will be the sign, that there's something more. If you send someone who is and I said this, a recognized,
Wow.
I think I even said credentialed expert.
You really got
weird
specific
thing to put out there, right?
Yeah, I love it.
So anyway, and so I put that out there very sort of intentionally, but also at the same time thinking there's no way in hell this is going to happen. Have you ever done that? Like you pray something or you put something out there and you think, but of course this isn't going to happen.
Oh
this
yeah.
is stupid.
I'll tell you
But
a story
I put it
after
out there
this.
very intentional.
Yep.
Well, so several weeks later, I was hanging out with a friend of mine and I was pretty deep into some drug dependency days. And I've had struggles on and off with that throughout my life, but I was very deep at this point to drug dependency. And so I was hanging out with one of my fellow druggie friends. And I was asking her if she could get me a connection for something I was looking for. And she was like, oh yeah. She was like, my buddy, I'll have him come over because he has a prescription for this or whatever, right? And so this guy comes over. And this guy, by the way, is dead now. He got stabbed to death in a heroin deal gone bad.
Geez.
So anyway,
Wow.
but he came over and he became a good friend of mine for a while. But anyway, he came over this first meeting, and I was trying to get some pills, and so we did this transaction, and then we started hanging out, and we got along. I liked him. It wasn't like a romantic thing. He was gay, actually, but it had kind of a rapport, and so we hung out that night, the three of us, and toward the end of the night, we'd been having different conversations about different things, and he said, my dad is coming into town. I'm going to start crying saying this. My dad is coming into town next week. And I think you're so smart and you're an academic. Because at that point I was in grad school. I was getting my PhD. He said, you're so smart. You're an academic. He is too. You should go out with us. I think you'll really hit it off. And, it's funny because I'm just talking to this like druggy guy here, right? But he's saying, you need to meet my dad. He's really smart. So I said, yeah, I'd love to. And I said, what does he study? And I said, what does he do? And he's like, oh, well, he's a professor at UVA, University of Virginia. And I said, what does he study? And he said, he studies near-death experiences.
Dude, you just gave me chills.
And
wow.
It turns out that this guy, his name is Ed Kelly. You can look him up. He works at the Division of Perceptual Studies at UVA, which, by the way, is basically the only academic institution that has a department devoted to paranormal activity and near-death experiences and things of this nature. And I'm not saying that I believe like ghosts and all that, right? There's a range of paranormal activity. Some of it, I think, legit, some of it not.
For sure.
But one of the main things that they study in a very methodical, scientific way is near-death experiences. And in fact, he is one of the top 5 experts in the world on near-death experiences.
Wow. That is unbelievable.
Some people would write that off as a coincidence, but I just can't, dude.
Nah, dude. I don't either. I think that's
into your life.
That's too remarkable. It's just too remarkable. When things like that happen and I started experiencing certain synchronicities like that, you can't just write it off as coincidence. I think your message was answered, It
was. And, and this is what I want to say to people too about spirituality is you have these moments in your life of synchronicity and these moments of affirmation. And it doesn't necessarily make the road easy because I'm still, quite frankly, in a crisis of faith. And I've had some things happen recently in my life that have really made me just feel devastated about the suffering in this world and what I see as the meaninglessness of it. But I tell you, Shane, stuff like that, stuff like what happened to me back there with that synchronicity, that is what sustains me. And that is what keeps me thinking, don't give up. Come on. You got that message back there. You've gotten messages before.
Yep.
Just keep, even if you don't understand it, even if you fucking hate God sometimes.
Yep.
Like I'll say that sometimes. I'll be like, I fucking hate you. Sorry. Can I be cursing?
Yeah. It's totally fine. Yeah.
I'll say that. Sometimes that is the only form of prayer that I can muster is to tell God I hate him. But you know what? Underneath all of that, I'm still there with him.
Right.
I'm still there.
Yep. I mean, there's people in the Bible who really don't like God because he's punishing them, but they still hold it together and find love in the end. And it's all a test. You reminded me of one of the major synchronicities I've experienced. I don't know if I shared this on the show, but it's like so I was atheist forever, just militantly atheist. And then I married a Christian, so that was weird. And then I started to like really wanted to try to pray. And I was like, every time our son was in the NICU. This is 8 years ago, and I tried praying. I actually walked around New York City while he was in the NICU, going to different churches and just sitting there and trying to pray and talking to different priests and all this stuff, Greek Orthodox and all types of people. And it just felt like a fraud. I remember even trying to pray and it just not working. Didn't feel right. And then that continued for a while, for years, and just not connecting. And telling everyone, like, I just want to learn, like, how do you pray? Like, how does it, I know it seems so easy, but I'm like, how do you do it? How do I say it? It just seems silly. And then I even did this show during lockdowns with a buddy of mine who was like, what was he, Pentecost? So he was like super religious. And then there was me, and we would talk for like a year or two about a lot of things, life in general, but always come back to like praying. And so this is like a theme in my life. How do you pray? What is prayer? And then, this is a weird segue. And then Kanye West comes into my life randomly, right? And that whole thing happens. And I am in LA with him. And what does he have me do for 2 months after that? He's making me write prayers.
Wow.
So like
Wow.
me and him talk about what he's wondering what prayer was. And so that weekend in LA, we go to church, we're talking about prayer. In my head, I'm like, that's hilarious that this guy I've like talked about for so long is now asking me about prayer. I've been thinking about prayer. And then when I go home, he keeps hitting me up. He's like, we just got to learn to pray. And I didn't tell him any of this. He's like, I just got to learn to pray.
On his own, you got to learn to pray.
Yeah. And he's like, every day I'm literally writing prayers for him.
Wow.
And we're like we're like in a creative writing workshop for prayers, and he's like, we should say this and that. So I'm just like, oh, that's hilarious. Oh, on top of all of that, before everything happened with Kanye, I did the same thing you did. I talked to God. I said, just send me a sign on how to. I literally said, how do you pray?
On how to pray.
Literally, and I asked him. I didn't ask for a credentialed. I didn't get that specific. I should have. Well, it worked out, but I swear to you, that next day is when I got the text from Tim Pool saying you should come through. And I knew it was going to be about meeting Kanye. Didn't know anything was going to happen like that, and it didn't. This whole story, the way I'm telling it to you, it didn't really dawn on me in that epic of a way till later, where I'm like, oh wow, all these years and me even asking, it just was like, oh, that's hilarious. I can't write that off. It's another one of those things where it's like, that's so remarkable, so crazy personal to the thing I was going through for years. I'm not writing it off as just a mere coincidence. It's too beautiful, And
I understand that there are people who would say, well, I totally get this. What a stupid way for God to communicate to people. Why doesn't he just speak?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that the most logical thing? If he wants to be heard, then he speaks. And I totally get that. I feel that at times. And I can't explain why this more circuitous, mystical, subtle way of communication is the one that people tend to experience. But there's so much that I can't explain. And really, as much as I, in many ways, hate this world and don't understand this hellscape that we are in. And I know there are beautiful things too, but I'm depressive. I see it mostly as a hellscape. But even though I feel all that, I don't understand it. I'm very often angry at God. At the same time, I basically still come down to the idea of the Pascalian wager, that what each of us faces in life, among other things, is a choice to bet on meaning or to bet on no meaning. And those who bet on no meaning, or you live your life according to that, I totally get it. I'm there with you many days, and I get it. But at the same time, overall in my life, I'm trying to bet on meaning because I don't see the advantage in going the other way.
That's great. I totally agree with you. I get it because it is a hellscape. I think it's been a hellscape for a very long time. And we just inherited this hellscape, and it's going to continue being a hellscape, but there's also huge pockets of beauty. And I also think that God's voice could be the events themselves too. Like maybe it's just the perception of hearing a voice isn't the right interpretation. I think also it's like that the language is the thing happening sometimes, and it's just too profound, to think of as like a word or a voice. But yeah, I choose to bet on meaning. That's a great way of putting it. Totally. Well, I think we should bet on meeting is the greatest way to end that.
Now that everyone's
this
crying.
conversation so much.
Yeah,
Thank you for having me on,
and
I'd love to have you on again. I know when I've had you on in the past, we've just talked Marilyn Manson, but I think we see here there's a lot more we can do. So.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely do that again, and we're gonna have more Marilyn Manson stuff to talk about soon, considering what's happening in about 20 days from now. So that's cool. Where can everyone find you on the internet?
Yes, so I do go by the difficult to spell moniker Colonel Kurtz. It's an Apocalypse Now reference for those of you who are a little older in the audience or war movie fans. Yep. But if you type in I'm on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and then YouTube, and it's Colonel Kurtz 99. So if you go to any of those and you search for Colonel Kurtz 99, or if that's too hard, just search for Kurtz Manson, because I've done so much Marilyn Manson stuff that now I'm associated in a Google search with him. So if you just put in Kurtz, Kurtz, and then Manson, then I'll come up too.
Yeah, everyone should definitely check you out.
And I've got more. I just want to say, I've got a new video that I just put out on the Menendez brothers. Basically, I tried to put together a 15-minute summary, a collection of different interview snippets,
Cool.
testimony, scenes, what have you, putting together what I think are the best pieces of evidence and testimony on their
Awesome.
behalf or for their side.
awesome.
So
Can I
if
ask-
people want to learn more, see a little summary, they can go to one of my pages and see it.
Awesome.
I'm just curious what you got your PhD in.
English literature and film. So I went to UNC, North Carolina, had a great experience. I've talked before about my issues with academia. We went on Tim Pool, and I definitely think it's got a lot of problems. And I've talked about that on my channel a lot too. But I did learn a lot from being in an environment where I was encouraged to and had to read a lot. And so it was overall for me, it was a really good experience despite my critiques of academia. But UNC, North Carolina, Chapel Hill, beautiful area. Go Tar Heels. And yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. You're the best. This was a great talk. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Likewise.
See
you
ya.
later.
Bye.
Bye.
Man, that was awesome.
That was great. She's very well spoken.
Yeah, she's great. So everyone should definitely check out her stuff online. Check her out. She talks about a lot of really interesting stuff. And the Marilyn Manson story is, something that's interesting to me because it's just it's another
What's happening
version
in
of
20
like,
days?
oh, his new album.
Oh.
Yeah, his new album. That was like cryptic.
Yeah. It's like
but it's not
inside
that
joke,
cryptic. It's not that
inside joke.
cryptic. No. He's got a new album coming out. But he's gone through a lot of interesting stuff and also been made into a caricature on the internet and in media in general, for the last 20-something years. So he's got a lot to say, I think, in these new songs, and I'm excited to hear him. So, man. So if you guys got stories, hit us up. We don't have a caller today, but we will have one for our next show, and because we're pre-recording this one. But you can hit me up with your stories at Shane Cashman at scanner.com, scnr.com, and we'll bring you on through Discord. And thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next time.